So, your employees are out there. Look at all the different ways they're out there, and they're out there while they're your employees, and of most concern, after they're your employees. What are they doing with the social media? What type of control, if any, can you really exercise over them through the use of post-employment restrictive covenants? So we're going to be talking now for the balance of the program, kind of some best practices and some tips and strategies. You heard Scott Blair say that Panera's employees are their biggest assets, and they want to do everything to protect those assets. So that specifically speaks to post-employment non-recruitment covenants. So if these former employees are out there on these various, and by the way, they're growing every day, these different social media outlets. I can't keep up with them. My kids are in their 20s, and they're constantly laughing at me for not being able to keep up with them. But, this is the new reality for the workplace. So, let's catch up to the reality, and let's think about what to do about that. So before we really dig in, I'd like to turn it over to Bret to talk a little bit about an employment lawyer's favorite concept, which is the one-size-fits-all concept. Bret?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So one thing that we are collectively seeing more of is multiple jurisdictional litigation issues arising from trying to enforce these agreements. The fact of the matter is that each jurisdiction provides different restrictions on what's going to be enforced and what isn't, as you've heard so far from the speakers. One thing that we would advocate for here is that if you have employees spread out through the country, you need to think very carefully about making sure you're tailoring your agreement, your non-solicitation agreement, to reflect a specific industry, the specific type of work that employee is doing, et cetera. And by way of example, there are cases, including the one mentioned, the Sagwa Group Courtney case, that discuss about the way you can and cannot limit customer information via LinkedIn. The bottom line of this is that it's a mistake for employers to try to fit one agreement across multiple jurisdictions without proper consideration of the restrictions that apply to each jurisdiction. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back to Jen to talk about some proactive steps to address this and other issues.
Thanks, Bret. So I want to pick up on what Bret was just discussing. The one-size-fits-all concept. I would say a related concept is the failure to modernize your agreements. We all know that recycling is good, but recycling is good for the environment. It is not good for the workplace when it comes to taking a single agreement and simply using it over and over and over, year after year after year, for your entire employee base. Bret was just talking about the multi-jurisdictional issue, but, now we have this issue of this rapidly growing social media thing. How do you address it? So my kids make fun of me for not knowing things, but now I can make fun and poke some fun at MySpace, which, by the way, is still out there and still in use. Which I was informed, I did not know that. The point being that it's very, very hard to keep up with this rapidly changing technology. The most important thing to do is to get into some type of regular checkups on your employment documents so that you could really start thinking about these things and thinking about what's important. For example, identifying client relationships at the start of employment and the scope of the protection of information for your employees concerning those relationships at the start of employment. You heard Mike talking about, this concern about kind of going up to an existing employee and say, hey, we're going to terminate you unless you agree to X, Y, and Z. Well, of course, the best time to address these issues is before somebody becomes your employee, and you make it clear that signing the enclosed document is a condition to your employment. And by the way, take your time, read it carefully, okay? The other thing, and Mike is going to talk about this more in a moment, but think about what happens when the employee leaves, okay? LinkedIn has certain notification systems. There are Twitter feeds. There are different things you could think about doing in your agreements that address what happens. And finally, set some expectations about ownership and use of social media. Again, I invite you to read our blog. We have a couple of pieces on this issue, who owns the information, in a LinkedIn profile, and how does that work, and how is that addressed? You know, it's just a matter of sitting down and really thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish and whether or not you can accomplish this through a very reasonable post-employment covenant. So speaking of, I want to ask Scott, you know, Scott, how has Panera addressed some of these concerns?
Well, you might know because I give you a call every once in a while.
That's true.
And actually, depending on what you tell, I either go to you, Bret, or Mike. So you know, it's you know, choosing the parent that you like the answer. But no, I think Bret's comment about modernization, or your comment about modernization and one size fits all. We are multi-state. I'm not sure whether we're in 40, 44 states. We have employees at the leadership level that have agreements. We are moving away from the one size fit all. We do try to have our agreements on a regular basis reviewed for changes, but we find it enormously challenging because, as you point out, each jurisdiction is different. As a principle, we try to have kind of the lowest common denominator as a base of our agreements. Say, in what states would this be mostly enforceable, and kind of address it from that perspective. But regular review is important, and giving one of these guys a call I find valuable.